Sometimes it's a good thing to step outside your comfort zone. I admit in my 30 plus years of gaming, there's a few genres I've never really dipped my toes into. Stuff like fighting games and MOBAs, things I've just never bothered with. Until recently that list included visual novels, but on a whim I decided to try the Danganronpa series and found out they were great. So it made me curious about what else I might be missing. Another genre I've never really given a go is stuff like Stardew Valley or Harvest Moon. Farming, life sim, cozy games, whatever you want to call it. I've played like 20 minutes of Stardew and a few hours of a Harvest Moon game for the GameCube I don't remember the name of. Besides that, I'm in the dark. Luckily for me, the latest entry in the Rune Factory series, Guardians of Azuma, released last month, and it seemed like a great opportunity to dip my toes in. Rune Factory has always been billed as a mixture of farming sim and JRPG, which seems to make it a damn good choice for trying out a genre. 1 month later, let's talk about a newbie's perspective on Rune Factory. Hello, my name is ianbits, and on this series we take a measured look at games sometime past release. As I stated in the intro, this review is not going to be done from an expert's perspective. Instead, I'm going to talk about this as someone who's new to the series and one half of the game's genre. The goal here is to give ideas on what it's like starting out, what I enjoyed and what I didn't, what felt lacking, and what hooked me. Some of this stuff might sound obvious or basic to longtime players. And as always, this is not a re-review, and I recommend checking out the official Noisy Pixel review for another perspective. Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma is an action RPG life sim hybrid developed by Marvelous. It is technically not Rune Factory 6, although it seems to be in most ways a follow-up to Rune Factory 5 from a gameplay standpoint. It features a new Japanese-inspired region and aesthetic, as well as a heavier emphasis on story. For those unfamiliar with the series, like I was, Rune Factory is a spin-off of Harvest Moon, which mixes a simplified version of its farming with a simplified action RPG. You play as an Earth Dancer, a sort of chosen one who can commune with the gods and use their powers. You've lost your memory, but luckily have formed a pact with a dragon who can fly you around and remind you to do stuff every day, like he's doing an impression of Morgana from Persona 5. After awakening the goddess of the village where you land, you're given the goal of doing the same to the rest of the gods so they can reinvigorate the land and stop a somewhat poorly defined apocalypse. The setup is fine here. It obviously leans into pretty tried and true stuff like Amnesia, but as a framework to send you to several villages and give you motivation to revitalize them by building houses and farming radishes or whatever, it ties the two parts of the game together really nicely. I want to talk about the story first. One half is pretty disappointing, the other half is very good but could have been even better. The more lacking aspect is the main story. Having tried a few other Rune Factory titles afterwards, just for comparison, it is very noticeable that this game at the very least is attempting to have more of a cohesive narrative, rather than strictly being slice of life. Having a constant story goal to work towards gives way to isolated stories in each village. This is fine, but I think my issue with it is that it never becomes anything more than fine. The conflicts and antagonists are all extremely underdeveloped. The involvement your party members have in said conflict is a bit too limited, and all in all, it's just an extremely basic by-the-numbers plot. There are a few interesting things as you approach the end, as you finally have antagonists that get more involved in the plot, and a storyline between you and whichever character you didn't pick at the start, which at least involves character growth and a neat little integration of story and gameplay that I won't spoil. And while I think the main narrative is just kind of bland and uninteresting, I think there's a reason for that, which I'll go over in a second. The other aspect, which is far better, is the characters. As this does have life sim elements, there's a few dozen or so waifus and husbandos to get to know, as well as some NPCs who I honestly wish were romanceable. The character writing is pretty good. It's not mind-blowing or anything, but they do a good job of making each character distinct and likable. You get to know them through brief events that give you an idea of what they like and dislike, and then in general most characters will have a personal quest that allows them to have brief character arcs. I do wish there was sometimes more to these, as they trend more towards slice of life stuff than anything substantial, but more on that in a second. My favorite aspects were when the characters were tied into the main story, which unfortunately doesn't happen enough. This is mostly done with the 6 gods you awaken, but every once in a while other characters will pop in too. It's fun when you've gotten to know these guys by happenstance while building up a village, and then they appear to spice things up in the bland main narrative. It links the two aspects of the game together and makes things interesting. The characters are by far the best part of the story, and there's bound to be at least a few characters here that connect with whatever type of player you are. I personally liked Pilika and Fubuki, but you might be different, and that's the point. Let's come back to something I've alluded to. The reason the characters aren't super substantial, the reason the main narrative never goes far past the surface. Something I figured out as I was going through is that Guardians of Azuma is not a game that's meant to be deep. It's odd putting forth criticisms on the shallowness of certain things when really that's kind of the point. It's supposed to be basic, accessible, something that doesn't have any barriers for different types of players. That's why the characters are basic but likable. It's aiming for a specific vibe. It's meant to be a welcoming, simple, and relaxing experience, and certain decisions in the story reflect that. Whether you think that philosophy is enough to justify what would otherwise be considered story flaws is up to you. Let me start talking about the gameplay by briefly going over an example day once I got well into the game. I wake up and immediately beeline towards my field in Spring Village. I have the AI villagers tending to most of it, so I need to get there early to give them a head start. They're extremely slow, and so I try to make sure each plot is watered before they arrive. Doing this means they can focus on harvesting and planting and cover a wider area. I also do what I'll do at basically every stop, which is use one of the artifacts to accelerate the growth of crops. After that, it's off to Winter Village for similar reasons. This plot is much smaller, but I still try to do some of the work for the villagers to make sure I'm using the space well. I don't have as many areas unlocked here, so I can't get as much done. Then it's to Autumn Village, where the crops work a bit differently. Autumn is the best place to grow rice, and so I have massive rice fields that take fewer people to man. Sometimes I'll help them out if a lot of crops are ready on the same day, but rice doesn't need watering since you have to set it up in a water source to start anyway. I have a lot of villagers set to harvest lumber here as well, so I've planted extra trees to make their job a bit easier. Finally, it's the big one, Summer Village. Since villagers will auto-plant seemingly random crops, I've set them all to other tasks. Here is where I make the big bucks, massive fields of golden crops that I've painstakingly leveled up to make them even more valuable. I have to do all the watering, harvesting, and planting, but it's worth it. Every 3 days my wallet balloons and I go on a spending spree for new weapons and upgrades. Previously, I used part of this space to level up various different crops, but having reached level 9 with several random crops for villagers to use, I'm now committed to blasting as many golden pumpkins as possible within the space. Unfortunately, I didn't realize when choosing Summer Village for this that it has perhaps the least amount of space for crops, but it's more than enough. After I finished my crop work for the day, it's time to hang out with 20 or so different villagers. This basically just involves asking them to hang out, picking an event you'll think they'll like, and then watching a bar fill. Max friendship level is 10, and as they level, they'll gain new combat abilities, potentially give you new recipes, and unlock more parts of their personal stories. This usually takes the rest of the day, but if it doesn't, it gives me time to go through areas and pick up collectibles I missed or grab materials. Then it's time to sleep and do it again. As I'm saying all of this, it doesn't really sound that fun. It's a lot of busy work, menial tasks required for dubious benefit. None of it sounds particularly deep or particularly engaging, and yet I loved it. I got hooked. The routine became fun to me. I have absolutely no clue why, but it worked. This is why I clarified at the start that this is a new player's perspective. I'm sure someone with more experience in the genre could explain why falling into this simple routine is engaging. All I know is it fired at least a few of my neurons. The farming is kept pretty simple here. Plant crops, water them, harvest them for money, or use the results for cooking. Each crop grows best in a specific village, and the yield will be larger if you grow them there. There's honestly not a lot more to it, which was surprising. I went back and tried Rune Factory 4 after this, and crops are a bit more complicated. You don't automatically get seeds back like you do in Guardians of Azuma, and sometimes they seem to grow at different rates. Here, everything is uniform and simplified. I'm not going to reiterate this every time, but it goes back to what I said about the story. It's not deep because it isn't meant to be. The simplicity helps in making the atmosphere relaxing. You have things to do, not obstacles to worry about. This isn't a normal RPG where you have a bunch of goals and challenges to overcome. There's some of that here, but a lot of the farming is just about putting on a podcast and harvesting the out of some turnips. I'll also say one thing the game does really well is give you ways to spend your money. A lot of the combat is just numbers based since you have limited options, which means getting new equipment and upgrading it is necessary to progress there. Harvest crops, get new weapons, use those weapons to explore new areas that give new building recipes, use those buildings to level up your village, now you have more room for crops. Everything cycles together really well. Now there are a few things I dislike about this part of the game. The first is those buildings you get. Many of the recipes you'll find in dungeons are for decorations, things to make your village aesthetically interesting or consistent. However, many of these have an associated stat buff for the first time you place in each village. What this results in is every village having one of your building plots dedicated to to putting random crap in, and that's frustrating. The amount of decorations you have and the variety in aesthetics they provide is pretty mind-blowing, but you can never quite make your village look how you want because a part of each village is reserved for gameplay obligations. The other big issue I have with the villages is something I termed the golden pumpkin problem. There's a huge variety of crops that grow at different speeds in different places, but there's also a host of special golden crops that grow the same everywhere and are worth considerably more money. You can also use one of your artifacts to harvest multiple seeds from a fully grown crop. That means after a few batches, you'll have a billion seeds that are worth more and grow everywhere, and the reasons to use any other crop sort of vanish if you're power gaming. Eventually, this is what my summer village became, just masses of golden pumpkins that tripled or quadrupled the profit of all my other villages combined. These are both problems related to optimization though, and I only really needed to do so because I played the combat on the hardest difficulty. I imagine on normal you can kind of just do whatever you want in the villages and still manage fine, so I don't think these two issues are game breakers. While we're on it, let's take a brief detour and talk about combat. It will not surprise you to know that it follows the rest of the game in that it is remarkably and probably intentionally not that deep. It is very clear this is meant to be accessible for people coming from Stardew Valley or Harvest Moon, and the goal is to provide some amount of gameplay variety without alienating these players. Still, this is probably the aspect I think most needed an injection of additional depth, and as a result is probably my least favorite aspect about the game. Combat works by pressing X to attack, and not a whole lot else. If you spam it a bunch, you'll get a bit of a finisher at the end of a combo chain. You can do a charge attack by holding down X, but there isn't much besides that. A lot of this combat is sort of in the Ys or Dynasty Warriors level of simplicity. Just mash a button and watch stuff die quickly. You can also use your god artifact things in combat, with each having a few associated special moves you can do by attacking to build up a meter. These also deal elemental damage, so hitting a weakness will often just obliterate enemies. The big positive is the differentiation between the weapons. There aren't a ton of different weapon types, but they do legitimately force you to play at different speeds, and that's great. You can equip 2 at a time, although it'll get somewhat annoying if that second slot isn't a bow. You can bring any villager you've hit level 1 friendship with along as a party member, and honestly, they don't do much. The healers are helpful but pretty unreliable, and the damage dealers just don't deal a lot of damage. I think part of this might be how difficult it is from a money and material standpoint to keep them outfitted with current level gear, but I think it's fair to just expect you're going to be doing most of the heavy lifting yourself. The bosses follow a different template, but also one that's becoming pretty overused in gaming. That being filling up a stagger bar and then wailing on them with damage after you've done so. It's really nothing you haven't seen before, and that applies to the entire combat system. Not particularly original, and not really interesting or well executed enough to make up for the lack of originality. I understand the need to keep things accessible for people here for the life sim, but I still think there was a middle ground between overcomplexity and oversimplicity that they missed. Let's bring this back around to overall impressions of the genre. Does this game make me want to jump in and play Stardew Valley, Story of Seasons, Harvest Moon, anything like that? Well, yes and no. I think these types of games are ones you need to be in the right mood for. Not every game needs to be about saving the world or deep, complex combat systems. It's fine to explore other things that use video games as a relaxation tool or give goals that aren't as aggressive or forced. I could easily see myself coming into this with a different mindset and just disliking the shallowness of the experience. But shallow doesn't have to mean bad if that's what you're in the mood for. I play a lot of sports games and they don't get much shallower than that. So I understand the appeal of turning your brain off sometimes after an annoying day at work or while you wait to be tired enough to sleep. I'm not exactly going to become a cozy game connoisseur, but I have a better understanding about why this genre is popular. The other thing I want to bring this around to is what a mix between life sim and RPG could do better than Azuma in order to really best utilize the merger. Honestly, Rune Factory does a great job at most of this. You need money to keep up to date with combat, you need combat to unlock new stuff, and you need to unlock new stuff to make money. It all feeds into itself. The thing that jumps out to me is potentially making things less focused on more structured and rigid maps, and embracing the idea of open exploration. Rather than chasing icons or following maps, imagine something like a simpler Breath of the Wild, where your extra time each day can be spent making little excursions into a bigger map and discovering things more organically. Maybe one day you stumble upon a quest that needs a certain party member, or another day you stumble upon a great place to get lumber, and you keep those in mind for future excursions. I think it's a bit too structured, and freedom would make the game better. Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma is not a tremendously special game. It's not this engrossing story that will change your life. It's not a deep combat system waiting to be unraveled. It's something far simpler. It's a relaxing adventure, something that allows you to build yourself into this routine without realizing you're building it, and then pass hours and hours falling into that routine. It populates a colorful world with likable characters and does whatever it can to avoid any deal breakers that counteract that. I don't necessarily think it's a great game, but it's something most people will have a good time with, and that's all entertainment really needs to do to be worth your money. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned to Noisy Pixel for more news and reviews.